Hi, this is Harry again. Today I'm gonna go through the chapter 4 of part 2 of Reincarnation and Biology Contribution to the Etiology of Birthmarks and Birth Defects. Volume 1 Birthmarks. N. Stevenson, MD. Okay. Uh, the previous video I did the case. First case. Now I'm gonna go to the second case of the chapter 4. I think there are 6 cases. Now I'm gonna go through the introduction of the chapter 4 of part 2, birthmarks related to the previous lives without verification of possible corresponding wounds. Introduction. In this and the following 2 chapters, I shall report a selection of cases, the subjects of which had birthmarks apparently related to the violent deaths in previous lives. In presenting the cases, I shall move from the weakest in the chapter to the strongest with regard to evidence of correspondence between the subject's birthmarks and the wounds on the body of the person whose life he claimed to remember. For the cases of the present chapter 1, I could not obtain any verification concerning the location on the relevant deceased person of a wound or wounds corresponding to the subject's birthmarks. Indeed, in 5 cases of this chapter, the subject's statements were all unverified because no person corresponding to them was ever traced. In the remaining 4 cases, such a person was found and the subject's main statement were verified. However, the information either never knew or could not remember the location of the wounds of the person whose life the subject remembered. To a reader who may ask why I present weaker cases first instead of immediately deploying the stronger ones, I offer the following reasons. First, by presenting brief accounts of cases having less detail, I can quickly demonstrate the great variety of the birthmarks with which this work is concerned. I consider it important for a reader to appreciate early in the study of this subject that the birthmarks I should describe are not hyperpigmented macules or nevi. The birthmarks of one of the 9 subjects, Eugene Sane, included in the chapter, is a flat hyperpigmented macule. But the other birthmarks are different. Most of them, in addition to having abnormalities of pigmentation, were elevated or depressed in relation to the surrounding skin, and several were puckered or markedly elongated. Many of these birthmarks looked like scars of acquired wounds or other lesions, although the photographs may not always demonstrate this clearly. Second, the case with no verification of the possibly corresponding wounds have other features besides the birthmarks in which they resemble the cases with such verification. For example, the subject spoke about the mode of death in most of the cases, and often showed phobias or lesser aversion related to the mode of death. Also, he started speaking about the previous life and the same young age, usually between 2 and 5, as did subjects of other cases, and he stopped speaking spontaneously at the usual age 5 to 8. When the subject of verified cases stop speaking about the lives they remember, there are grounds for thinking that at least some unverified cases belong to the same general type of case as verified cases. They may differ from verified cases only in the lesser amount of specific details about the previous lives that the subjects can remember and express. A subject of an unverified case who has a birthmark that is apparently appropriate for the mode of the death that he described. Provided that birthmarks has no normal explanation, has a stronger claim to having memories of a real previous life than a child without such a birthmark. I do not mean by the remark to dismiss the possibility that in some cases the child or his parents imagine or adapt the narrated details of a previous life to suit the birthmark. But I shall defer discussion of this possibility until later. Third, we should remember that our judgments about the whether a case is weak or strong with regard to what we consider evidence of no inherent value to the subject themselves. Those who have imaged memories believe they derive from a previous life they have lived, and they do so whether their memories are abundant or meager, and whether other persons agree with them or do not. In a comprehensive study of the subject, we should take into account the entire range of available cases, from those with little detail and slender evidence to those having many details and strong documentary support. The first of the cases in the previous chapter illustrate the occurrences in an unsolved case of many of the features found in solved ones. The subject, Myint saying, began speaking about the previous life when he was between 3 and 4 years. He recalled the mode of the death in the previous life, and the death was violent. He longed instantly for the family of the previous life and thought he could find where he had lived. And he relived the previous personality's vacation in his play. In addition, he had a birthmark that he related to the death in the previous life, an ingredient missing from his case that is often found in other cases, especially in Burma, is a dream on the part of the subject's mother or some other persons before or during the mother's pregnancy with the subject. Oh, this is has to do with his mom pregnancy, her dream. I read that in the previous video. Continue. This case and the following ones have in common the feature that subjects were Burmese children who remembered previous life as a Japanese soldiers killed in Burma during World War II. I thought that I could assist readers who wish to compare the features of the cases by grouping them together. Later in this work, I report other cases of the same type, Burmese subjects remembering previous life as a Japanese soldiers. The remaining 6 cases of this chapter occurred in Turkey, 2 cases, Alaska 1 case, Burma 2 cases, and India 1 case. Go to the chapter 4. Okay, this is the case of Maung, Myint, Aung. I'm sorry for misspelling the names. I'm not used to these names. Maung, Myint, Aung. Summary of the case and the investigation. Maung Myint Aung was born in May 1972 in the village of Magibin, which is located about 1.5 kilometers south of Pyongyang in Upper Burma. It is 400 kilometers north of Rangoon. His parents were Yu Ni Tin and his wife Dao Tin Hela. Yu Ni Tin, his father, was a cultivator of modest means. Maung Myint Aung was the youngest of their 9 children. When Maung Myint Aung was born, he was found to have a large horizontal linear birthmark on his neck. The figure 4-4, the picture is the next page. When he was about 3, he began to say that he was a Japanese. Thereafter, he made a small number of statements about the life and death of the Japanese soldier he claimed to have been. None of these have been verified. Maung Myint Aung also showed some behavior that was unusual for his family, and some of this I classify as a Japanese traits. You knew of Pyongyang, whose valuable assistance in the study of the Maung San-Wing case and many other cases in Upper Burma I have already mentioned, took us to the case of Maung Myint Aung. Nearly all our information about the case derives from a single long visit to Maung Myint Aung and his parents at Magibin on March 11, 1980. Maung Myint Aung's mother, Dao Tin Hla, seemed extremely shy and contributed almost no information. What we learned, therefore, came almost entirely from Yu Ni Tin, although Maung Myint Aung himself gave a little information. In February 1984, Do Hin Ai, at my request, the guy who was working with the psychiatrist, returned to Magibin and obtained some further information about the case from Dao Tin Hla, his mom, and Maung Myint Aung. Yu Ni Tin was out of the village at this time. Statement made by Maung Myint Aung. Maung Myint Aung claimed to remember some details of previous life in Japan. He said that he had been the oldest of the 7 children in his previous life. His father had died, but his mother was still alive, referring presumably to the date when the Japanese soldier left Japan, or perhaps last heard from his mother while he was in Burma. He was unmarried. He did not give a name of the Japanese soldier or state his rank. He also gave no address for where he had lived in Japan. There was a suggestion from Maung Myint Aung's offer to fetch money from Japan that the Japanese soldier had been, if not prosperous, at least better off economically than was Yu Ni Tin. But Maung Myint Aung never said this explicitly. Another cluster of Maung Myint Aung's memories concern the dead in the previous life. He said that he had been in in a Japanese army that retreated before the advance of the British army. He retreated as far as Rangoon and found himself, along with 4 friends, at the zoo, where they were in danger of being captured. Preferring death to capture, they all committed suicide, although the Japanese soldier had his gun with him. He killed himself by slitting his throat with a large knife or perhaps a bayonet. Maung Myint said that after the death of the Japanese soldier, he had stayed at the Rangoon Zoo. As a discarnate personality, he said that he saw Yoon Tin at the zoo, and that Yoon Tin had a scar. While he was at the zoo, the discarnate Japanese soldier then followed Yoon Tin back to Megaibin, where he became reborn as a child. The comments: the Japanese army retreating from the victorious British army, which by then units of the Burmese Defense Army had joined, were in a desperate situation when the British entered Rangoon early in May 1945. The Japanese soldier about whom Maung Myint Aung was talking, if he existed, must have been among one of the isolated groups of Japanese soldiers in Rangoon whom the British and the Burmese were then engaged in rounding up. We can date his death with fair closeness to find 2 weeks of May 1945. Yoon Tin recalled that he had gone to the zoo in Rangoon, but he could not remember that he had been scared there. I did not learn when he had gone to the zoo in relation to the beginning of the Dao Tin Hla pregnancy, his mom when she was pregnant with Dao Tin Hla pregnancy with Maung Myint Aung. Maung Myint Aung's behavior related to the previous life. Circumstances and manner of Maung Myint Aung speaking about the previous life. Maung Myint Aung's first statement about the previous life occurred on a rainy night when he was about 3 years old. He said that he longed for a Japan and did not want to stay in Magibin. Then he went on to describe the scene at the Rangoon Zoo and how he had followed his father home to Magibin. Thereafter, Maung Myint Aung intended to talk about the previous life on cloudy days. And therefore, especially during the monsoon season of the late summer and autumn, he was particularly liked to talk about the previous life at night, just before he went to sleep. He talked about it often, but not every day. Yoon Tin once commented that the family had less money than it had previously. On hearing this, Maung Myint Aung told him not to worry because he could obtain money from Japan. He would afterwards say that he would go to Japan and bring back some money. However, he asked his father not to go with him because the journey to Japan was too expensive. He did not say where in Japan he could go. He could go Japan until he would go, or whom there he would visit. He continued making these proposals about going to Japan until he was around 7 years old, which was the year before we met him. Myint Aung seems depressed when he spoke about the previous life, but he did not cry. Myint Aung play at the Myint Aung's play at being a soldier. Myint Aung liked to play at being a soldier. He organized games of soldiers among his playmates, tended to be the leader in them, and called himself an officer. Myint Aung's Japanese traits. He had a preference for sweet foods, as do most Japanese people. When he was young, he showed some resistance to learning the forms of worship in Burmese Buddhism and tended to worship in a style and familiar to his parents. He later conformed to the style of the worship among Burmese Buddhists. He also knelt on his knee, as the Japanese people do and Burmese ones almost never do. Compared with other Burmese children, Myint Aung was hardworking and relatively insensitive to pain or physical discomfort. He was noted to be somewhat harsh, although not cruel, in his attitude toward other persons. His father described his behavior as tending to be crude, like that of a rough and ready soldier. Myint Aung became disturbed by any remark adverse to the Japanese people. For example, he did not like to be told that a Japanese soccer team had lost a match. Okay. Myint relations with the Japanese army. The relations between the Japanese army occupying Burma and the Burmese people were generally untroubled, but in some regions they were appallingly had and everywhere there would be exceptions to the relationship generally prevailing in a particular region. Thus, individual Japanese soldiers or sections of soldiers might be arrogant and cruel, while others nearby were friendly and kind to the Burmese. Myint had a good relationship with the Japanese army. He worked with them for about 3 years, almost the duration of their occupation of Burma 1942 to 1945. As a laborer, loading arms and ammunition, he said that he became most friendly with them. He added that in the area of Magibin, the Japanese had behaved well. You knew who was living in area during the occupation, confirmed that the opinions he mentioned that the Japanese army had a unit in the area whose members had treated the Burmese well. Some of them learned to speak English and Burmese, and they saw that their workers had adequate rations. Myint birthmark. From a photograph that I took shows the prominent birthmark on Maung's neck as it appears when he was almost 8 years old. In 1980, the mark is nearly horizontal and extends almost across the whole front of the neck. However, it was more prominent in the middle of the neck, where it seems slightly elevated compared with the skin above and below. From the photograph that Maung took shows the birthmark when Aung extended his head farther than he had for the figure 4-4 picture. In it, the mark appears as an area of slightly increased pigmentation about a centimeter wide and extending across the neck. The figure 4-6 is the first of a group of photographs of fatal wounds that I have included to illustrate some of the wounds to which I believe the birthmarks correspond. It shows the gaping wound of a man who cut his own throat suicidally. This man was right-handed and began his self-inflicted wounds on the left side of the neck, where several smaller wounds can be seen leading into the main central wound. These smaller wounds are probably tentative cuts or hesitation wounds that persons who cut their own throats sometimes make before they execute the deeper fatal slash. Kerr, 1939. Little John, 1925. Myint was left-handed, and he said that the Japanese soldier whose life he remembered had been left-handed also. I did not observe any subsidiary birthmarks on the right side of his neck that might have corresponded to the beginning of the additional cuts or hesitation wounds. Other relevant medical information. Myint's birthmark had not changed in position or appearance between his birth and the time of our photographing in it in 1980. Dao Tin Hla's pregnancy with Myint was normal. Myint's later development. When Do Hnin Aye met Myint in February 1984, he was almost 12 years old. He was in a good health and attending school in the 3rd grade. Although he had never failed any grade, he was somewhat behind his peers. Myint said that he no longer remembered the previous life, but he still had some behavioral memories. For example, he liked to play at being a Japanese officer. He still had a special fondness for Japan and also for military life. He said he wished to be a soldier when he grew up. He was still unusually fond of sweet foods such as jaggery and kiatagar, a candy made from molasses, somewhat like toffee. He even added sugar to his rice. He did not like chilies and not curries commonly eaten in Burma. Okay, I stop here now. I finished this case. That's 6 cases. The book is too long. It's a lot of information. It's a lot of work. Many years he did this research. I really like this book. This is chapter 1. Chapter 2, I think, is a lot cheaper. $60, 50, 70, depends which. So I stop now and continue next time. Thank you for listening. Have a good day.